So, good afternoon everybody. A very warm welcome to you all for today's SOFiPLUS. Today's SOFiPLUS is on the topic of SOFiPLUS 2010. This time we're going to look at some system generation in 3 dimensions of a steel structure using structural elements and finite elements. This is part 3 of a series of 6 SOFiPLUS on the topic of SOFiPLUS 2010. If you've missed the first 2 parts, then you can download these to watch them later on, and I'll show you where you can find those at the end of the SOFiPLUS. So today in the part 3, I'm going to take you through the basic process of inputting this 3-dimensional steel structure. So first I'd like to give you a brief introduction to the GoToWebinar software, and then we'll move on to the topic for today, and then at the end there'll be some time for questions and discussion. Okay, so the GoToWebinar software, you should be able to see this window on your screen. If you'd like to view as full screen, then you can select that option using the button here. The raise hand for question option at the moment is deactivated. If you'd like to use your phone to listen into the SOFiPLUS, then you can use the information in the box here. You will need a tone phone if you want to do that. A note on the audio. All the participants will be able to hear me, but they themselves will not be able to speak and be heard. If you do have any questions, then if you'd like to wait till the end of the SOFiPLUS and type a question into the text box at the bottom of the GoToWebinar window, then either I or my colleague will try and answer your question at the end. Okay, so now I'm going to open SOFiPLUS X, and here you'll be able to see a project that I've already set up. This project is based on a tutorial that's already available from the SOFiSTiC info portal, and that one is titled 3D Tutorial Storage Building. I'll show you briefly where you can find that if you wanted to follow this along at a later date. If you go to the support page of the SOFiSTiC website, and then down to the info portal link, in the document type, if you select tutorial, and for your application steel design, here you can see where the tutorial for this is based on. Now, this tutorial was based on a previous version of SOFiSTiC, however the basic process is the same, and it does have rather more explanation than I'll be able to cover here today. Okay, so back into SOFiPLUS. Here I have my basic layout already set up. I have here specified a grid line system which you can either import from another project or you can create one from scratch here. The one that I've used here is from the Tools menu of the Tools tab of the SOFiPLUS sidebar. And now that is found at Axis Raster, which basically draws a grid of grid lines. There's also the option to add a single grid line there too. If I just open up that grid line, I can show you, I just double clicked on it there, and here you can see the input dialog window for that. It's quite simple to use. Here in the drawing, the diagram in the left, you can specify where you want your start point to be. So in this case I've chosen the bottom left. For my longitudinal axis I've specified grid lines at 5 meter spacings, and I've asked that to be repeated 6 times, so I have my 6 repeats in the longitudinal direction. I've also got 2 grid lines in the lateral direction, and they're 18 meters apart. So the first thing I did when I set up my drawing, of course, is to specify my system information. Here in the Edit System Information button, in the dialog box, I can show you how I've set this up. So here is my usual information for my title, database and directory. I'm still using pure Eurocode norm in this case, and for today's project here I specified a 3D frame system. I have a world coordinate system specified here, and my drawing units are in meters. And here in the small diagram you can see my global axis system, and the orientation of my dead load is in the negative Z axis. Okay, so after I specified my system information, I was set up with some materials. I also specified here a normal structural steel, which I did by clicking on New Material in the right-click menu. I've also specified some cross-sections for the project. You'll notice here that I have 2 instances of the IPE 450. And the reason that I've done this is because I'd like to use this first section here for my column, and the second instance is the section that I'd like to use for a haunched beam. And the reason I've kept these separate is for the opportunity later on to modify my haunched section without having to modify any of the properties of the other sections that have this assigned. I've also got here specified a simple 20mm steel bar, which I'm going to use as a cable element, and also my last section here I've specified a circular section, which I'm going to use for a truss element, a strut between my frames. So if I right click on that and go to Properties, here you have a preview of the section that's been specified. So the first thing I'd like to do is to split my view up into 2 viewports. That way it allows me to keep this ISO view while also working on an elevation view of my frame. So now I'm going to click on the View drop-down menu, and in Viewports I'm going to select 2, and I'm going to ask for those to be split vertically. The current viewport you can see surrounded by the thick black line. Here I'm going to choose a left side view for an elevation of my frame, and in the other viewport, if I select that, I'm going to leave that as the ISO view. So the first thing I'd like to do is to start to assign some sections to my frame. And the frame that I'm going to do here is I have 2 columns at either side. In this first section here, I'm going to assign a haunched section. And just bear with me a moment, I think the connection's a little slow. Sorry about that. Okay, so to go on with my frame, I'm going to first draw in some structural lines. So I'm going to go to the Structural Element tab of the SOFiPLUS sidebar. I'm going to select the command line. Now in here, I'm going to leave all of the information blank, including for cross-section. And I'm simply just going to draw my elements in. So my first column, and then I'm going to draw in a line to my first marker for a haunch section, and then I'm going to draw in my first beam, my second beam, and then my last haunch section and the column. Now we'll be able to see in the ISO view here that the lines I've drawn in for my columns aren't quite where I want them. So here I'm simply just going to select the line. The AutoCAD grips appear, so I'll click once to pick it up, and then I'll just click again to drop it where I'd like it. And again for the other. The next thing I'd like to do is to assign some cross sections to my columns. So now I'm going to use the Modify Line tool. Now here I'm asked to select my object, so I'll select my two columns and then right click. And here appears the Structural Line dialog box again. Now in here I'm going to specify a centric beam section for my columns, and I'm going to choose my cross section number 1 and click OK to that, and then in the General tab I'm also going to assign my columns to a group, and in this case I'm going to assign them to 1 and click OK. The next thing I'll do is to specify a section for my two main beams. Again, I'm going to use the Modify Line tool, select those two, right click. I'm going to give those the group number 2, and in beam cable I'm going to choose centric section again, and for this I'm going to use the cross section number 3, the IP 400, and click OK to that. So the next thing I'd like to do is to specify my haunch section over here. So again, you Modify Line, I'll select that and then right click. Now in this case it's important to note the local coordinate system of the structural element there. In this case you can see the x-axis is along the main axis of the beam, and this will help you to determine which is the start and end of your beam. So in this case I'm going to choose a centric beam again. I'll just cancel that so it's a bit clearer. Here for the cross sections I can define a section for my start. So here I'm going to specify a 450 section, section number 2. Click OK to that, and then in the end section here I can specify a second section, and I'm going to choose the 400 here to match up with the main beams.